spread, right, to the rest of Europe specifically, right? So there are two Renaissance artists that we asked you to know, and there's also other people as well, right, from the Renaissance. So let's kind of dive into them, right? So you have Michelangelo first. So Michelangelo, can I even full screen this? There you go, that should be better. So Michelangelo is an artist, right? And we know he is a sculptor, we know he is a painter, right? And he paints the Sistine Chapel ceiling, right? And he also does the Statue of David, among other statues, are just two of the big ones that you might be asked to know. Another artist you have is Leonardo da Vinci, right? And da Vinci is famous for a number of different things as well. He's one of these Renaissance men that is pretty good at a lot of different things, right? But two of his works of art are the Mona Lisa, and you have the Last Supper being another big famous one that you may recognize, right? So as far as writers go, the only one that you're going to really be specifically asked about is Shakespeare, right? William Shakespeare. He's an English writer. He writes a number of different things, right? He writes Hamlet, Romeo, Juliet, Macbeth, just known for in general sonnets and plays and essays and all of these different things, right? So that's Shakespeare, right? So we also talked about Erasmus, right? And Erasmus is one of these Renaissance intellectuals who's associated with this idea of humanism, right? This bettering yourself through through practice in art, through education, through rhetoric, through all of these different things that are being prominent again during the Renaissance era, right? So humanism and Christian humanism are derived from Erasmus, right? So if humanism is the practice of bettering oneself through study and things like this, right? Christian humanism then is bettering oneself through the ideas of Christianity and scripture and religion, right? So, okay, we kind of are starting this whole time around 1500, right? So let's dive into some of the trade things going on during this time period, right? So in 1500, around the world 1500, you're going to have some regional trade patterns begin to develop, right? We now have the discovery of the New World by Christopher Columbus. You're going to have this now interaction between the Americas and Europe, and in particular Africa and Asia, right? So all of these, you can add, Americas into here too if you'd like, North America and South America. Really, when it comes down to it, you're going to have these linkages all over the place. So if you wanted to add more than 3 there. But you really need to know that this is now just the beginning of this kind of interconnected to it. I'm sorry, Yana, there's going to be no way for me to get closed captions. They only work specifically with, in slides as a feature of it, and I don't think there's a way for it to work with this. It's just not going to be practical the way I'm doing this one and going over this. If you give me a minute or two, I might be able to come up with a quick fix, but I would need to kind of pause for a second here. Actually, this might work. Try it for free. Sorry, bear with me for 2 seconds while I try something. That's not gonna work, I don't think. Sorry guys, I know people are frustrated that I'm stopping here for a moment. There's just no great software. I'm not seeing anything great. Sorry, we're going to need to get going back here in a moment if I can't find anything in the immediate. I should have done this beforehand. I just forgot that I wasn't going to be able to use it. Is this going to work? This might work. Okay, bear with me. Can I caption start talking? Okay, this might actually work. Bear with me for 2 more seconds here. Alright, so this actually might work. It's going to be the best it gets. Oh, it's not going to be able to show both at the same time. I'm sorry, Yana. This is not going to work the way I want it to. I can try to turn the volume up on my mic. Actually, it looks like it's as high as it goes. All right, sorry, this is going to be as best as we get. I'm sorry, guys that need captions. This isn't just going to work the way it works when I use slides. So hopefully YouTube will be able to do this after the fact for those that need it. I'm sorry. Okay, so let's kind of keep going here. So we had our connection between Europe and Africa and Asia that we talked about, right? So as far as what trade route was used across northern Africa, we know for a fact we're going to have the trans-Saharan trade route, right? We did this in the trade route maps that we kind of covered. As far as the linkages, the northern European trade routes linked with northern Europe, you're going to have kind of the linkages from the North Sea down through these rivers all the way into the Black Sea. You're going to have Western Europe trade patterns being linked with Asia and Africa by sea and river and land. Ultimately, what sea linked the lands of Southeast Asia? It's going to be the South China Sea, right? So this should all be coming from your trade routes map that you guys did, right? So as far as what products were traded in China, you have really big thing is porcelain and tea. I don't know why it doesn't say that here, but you also have paper and things like the compass and silk. These things are all coming from Asia in particular, right? So we also know. So what products were traded from India, right? You have textiles being a big part, right? Textiles being cloth, among other things. Cloth and wool, silk, cottons, right? All of these things are coming from India during this time period. So what 4 products concerning aspects of science, many from the Middle East, were transferred along trade routes as well? On the key here, we're going to say things like astronomy, medicine, mathematics, the Arabic numeral system are going to be big parts of what's coming on, transferring around and diffusing through these trade routes. Okay, so here we are to religions again, right? So we have Christianity. Christianity in particular is going to be based around Europe and the Middle East. You have Islam, you're going to be kind of in the Middle East. You have Southern Europe and Northern Africa with the spread by the Ottoman Empire. You're going to have Hinduism being largely focused in India. You're going to have it being focused in Southeast Asia as well. Buddhism is going to be, it's going to come out of India, but it's going to be in China and Southeast Asia. And Judaism in particular, you're going to have Europe and the Middle East, right? Are your big spots. Okay, so let's look at the Reformation now and continuing, our conversation about religion here. So one of the things, what were some of the conflicts that challenged the authority of the Roman Catholic Church and started the Reformation in Europe? You have a couple things that people really felt were wrong with what was going on with Christianity, right? So one of them is this whole idea of the usury, right? And usury is this lending of money at high interest rates. The church was really not particularly fond of this. So who challenged this idea? You're going to have the merchants that were kind of dealing with money. That's just who were kind of combating these ideals, right? So Italy at the time was this major country that was dominated by the church, right? You have the Vatican and you have Catholicism and Christianity, kind of focused directly out of Italy and such, right, out of Rome. I'm going to answer that in a couple minutes, Joshua, as I keep going here. So the nobility in Germany and England in particular, as well as they're going to dislike this, right? They're not particularly happy with the Catholic Church being based specifically in Italy, and they're going to kind of begin to fight back here during the Protestant Reformation, right? So also, you have to deal with indulgences, right? And indulgences is this concept of paying money to the church in exchange for forgiveness of your sins. So Martin Luther in particular and other Christian humanists and other dissenters against the early dissenters against the church, they're going to speak largely out against these indulgences. This is going to be one of the big things, right? Martin Luther, he is going to nail up these 95 Theses right down here to the church door. And ultimately, he's going to kind of begin to preach his own beliefs of kind of this return to a stricter Christianity based off of the Bible, right? The ultimate authority comes from the Bible and Christianity and not from the Pope, right? And that salvation is going to come through faith alone, and that everyone, Christians, are going to be equal before God, right? And this is a big kind of speaking out against what was being preached by the Catholic Church at this point, right? And with this nailing of the 95 Theses to the church door, you're going to get the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. And from there, you're now going to have many different Protestants groups kind of begin to spread from these beliefs, right? So you have the next one being from a man named John Calvin, right? And Calvinism is going to be the branch that comes out, right? And you're going to have predestination is going to be one of the big beliefs of John Calvin. So predestination is this concept that when you are born, it is kind of preordained, right? How your life is going to be and whether or not you're going to be saved by God at the end. John Calvin believed in a good work ethic and living this righteous life based off of the Bible. And this significance of John Calvin is going to continue to spread the difference of Catholicism and Protestantism, right? So he's going to be helping to spread these ideas on that counter Catholicism, right? So what was another Protestant group? You're going to have a man named Henry VIII, right, who is the King of England, who is going to speak out against the authority of the church, right? And he largely does this because he wants to divorce his wife, and the Pope is not kind of willing to do this. And as a result, he breaks England away from Rome and kind of founds and heads the National Church of England, other words known as the Anglican Church, right? And that's going to be the way that England is going to end up going here. So through a roundabout way, you're going to have next Mary, right, who is take over after Henry VIII when he doesn't have any sons that live. Mary is going to turn England back to Catholic, but then Elizabeth I is going to come in when Mary dies and also has no kids, and she's going to bring it back to Protestant, and she's going to be a lot more tolerant of dissenters. She's going to kind of other people of other religions, she's going to be a bit more tolerant as a result. She also defeated the Spanish Armada, right, which is going to kind of maintain her claim to the throne, and also that England will remain Protestant, and she will also continue to be the head of the Anglican Church, which is why England today is still largely Protestant, right? So Protestants, right, the first groups to convert are going to be so the first ones are going to be in northern Germany, right? So you're going to have essentially the first Protestants, Martin Luther in particular, are going to be in northern Germany, and that's going to spread Protestantism. as a whole, and the Habsburgs, who are largely in kind of southern Germany, right? Remember, Germany isn't actually a thing at this point, but geographically we're talking, are going to remain Catholic as they're a bit closer to Italy, right? So you're going to now have these religious wars that begin to start off between the Catholics and Protestants, and you're going to have hundreds of years of this, actually, but 30 of the biggest ones become known as the 30 Years' War that take place between 1618 and 1648. I don't think we're going to ask you that specifically, but the 30 Years' War is the major war that occurs, right? During this time period, in these religious wars, you're going to continue to have the French Huguenots, right? And these French Calvinist Protestants that are kind of meandering around wherever they can find acceptance, right? And at first they end up in France, and the French king is not the French king and such is not particularly happy about this. You end up kind of getting some fighting that after a little bit now of this fighting, the French king is actually going to grant them some freedom of worship with what's called the Edict of Nantes. But then ultimately, you're going to have, I can post the key afterwards, yep. You're going to have the French kings kind of revoke it, right, afterwards. So you have 100 years here for the Huguenots. They're going to be pretty good, but then after that, they're going to kind of need to be wandering again and get out of France, otherwise they're going to be persecuted. You have the 30 Years' War is the religious war we were talking about just up here by number 14. The French cardinal that's going to change this from a religious war to a political war is Cardinal Richelieu. So you should be familiar with that. So we were kind of largely talking about the spread of Protestantism, right? But the Catholic Church is going to do a lot of things in their power to kind of fight back against that, right? And this is going to become known as the Counter Reformation. Some of the things that they're going to do, right? They're going to create this religious order known as the Jesuits or the Society of Jesus. That's going to kind of try to continue to spread Catholic doctrine around the world. I'll post it, so that's not a big deal. So you're going to have the Council of Trent, which is also going to kind of reaffirm and reinforce Catholic doctrines, kind of them saying that we don't really feel like we're doing anything wrong at all. So they're going to try to, again, push this idea of Catholicism and Christianity, against the ideals of the Reformation, hoping that it's going to kind of be able to fizzle out the Reformation. So during these hundreds of years, anyway, sorry. So you have, all right, just find my place again here. So you have this idea of secularism, right? So after these religious wars and things like that, you're going to have the push against. Did I lose my feed here? I think it's, oh, there we go. Anyway, okay, so you have secularism is the idea of kind of keeping away, keeping religious things away from the state, right? So it's kind of removing the religious aspect and kind of being what's called secular, right? So you're also have religious tolerance beginning to spread a bit more following these wars of religion, right? So we also talk about the printing press, right? And the Johannes Gutenberg is the kind of the person that's going to bring the printing press to Europe, which is going to really stimulate literacy, right? People being able to read, and ultimately the Bible is going to be the cause of this. It's going to be the reason for this, right? So if you have the Bible being printed in numerous languages, in French, German, and English by Gutenberg and co., you're going to have people wanting to read it and beginning to read it, and that's what's going to spark the literacy, right? So let's talk about exploration. So we had talked about a number of these different people, so let's look at them, right? So in no particular order here, we talked about Pizarro. Francisco Pizarro, right? And he sailed for Spain, and they're going to conquer the Incas down in South America. You have Hernando Cortez, who is also Spanish. He conquered the Aztecs in Mexico. You have Vasco da Gama, who is Portuguese, who's going to travel around Africa to India and open up trade over there. You're going to have Ferdinand Magellan, and Magellan is Spanish, where he went almost around the world, but he's going to die in the Philippines, but his expedition will continue to make it all the way around, right? Francis Drake is English. He's going to make it all the way around the world. You have Jacques Cartier, who is French, who is going to sail to Canada and kind of begin colonization efforts over there in Quebec. And then you have Christopher Columbus, right, who is Spanish. He's going to sail to the modern-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic, the Bahamas, Cuba, right, and kind of open up the new world for Europe, right? So what was the reasoning for all this exploration, right? The exploration is going to come down, it's the fall of Constantinople, right? We talked about you're talking about the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, that are effectively going to make it all the way to the 1400s when the Ottoman Turks are going to sack the city, and you're going to now kind of have the loss of this Christian stronghold here in Asia Minor. And as a result, now you don't have access to the East like you did because the Muslims that now have taken over this area of the world are not particularly friendly to the Christians, right? And as a result, they need to kind of find other ways to get to the East as far as trading goes, right? So you have people believing that they can make it all the way around going west, Christopher Columbus in particular, and he's going to open up, once he actually discovers that there's a whole new landmass over there, you're going to now have people doing this exploration for all sorts of different purposes, right? The big things being, we have triple G, right? God, gold, and glory. So demand for gold and spices and natural resources are going to be one of the reasons for this trade and opening up these markets, right? Spreading Christianity and diffusing Christianity, the political and economic competition between these European empires. I'm just going to get the extra credit question at this moment here. So Mrs. Kipperman has 4 sisters. So what I'm going to say is that tomorrow during even days, you're going to be asked to know that 2 of her sisters are Jessica and Elizabeth. On odd days, you should know her other ones. She has another sister named Hannah, and then you also have Gabrielle. So those are who you're going to be expected to know for the extra credit. And then we're going to keep going here. So, okay, so what are some of the advancements in navigation and sailing that are going to continue to allow the exploration, right? So we talked about the compass and the caravel, the triangular sail or the lateen sail, right? The astrolabe and the sextant. All of these things are going to be important for the exploration. We did a project for this, right? And we talked about Henry the Navigator, who is, Portuguese royalty, who is going to essentially, he is going to kind of finance a lot of this exploration for Portugal, and in doing so is going to kind of push Portugal onto the world stage, right? He's going to the Portuguese are going to then establish trading posts all along the western coast of Africa, and they're going to begin to trade slaves and gold, or for slaves and gold, for manufactured goods that are going to be produced in Europe. And the slaves are then, you're going to get the beginnings of the transatlantic slave trade, right? So what are some of the big European nations, right? The trading companies, you're going to have Portugal and the Netherlands, right? The Dutch East India Trading Company, the British, the East India Trading Company, right? So you're going to have the Columbian Exchange, which is resulting as now the connection between these two areas of the world, right? So some of the things that you would kind of need to think about, right? Examples of products from the Americas that changed Europe, right? Remember we did this menu. So you have corn, tobacco, tomatoes, potatoes are all things that were a new world products that are going to end up going to Europe and really drastically changing agriculture that way. And similarly, vice versa, you have things like livestock and certain grains, in particular wheat, that did not exist in the Americas. So you're also going to get the spread of diseases, right? In particular, smallpox. Smallpox is going to drastically kill a large number of the Native Americans. We're talking 90+% of the Native Americans that lived in the New World are going to die as a result of New World diseases. And a lot of this is sort of accidental, although you're going to have some instances of early colonizers trying to spread these diseases through things like blankets and things. Early kind of British settlers, in particular, colonizers, when they realize that there's going to be some wars that are kind of taking place as a result, right? So, we have Native Americans die quickly as a result of these diseases. So they're going to bring in Africans as these slaves now, with now the transatlantic slave trade that's existing during this time period. And we know it's based off of race largely, is the slavery, right? And they're going to bring the Africans in this triangular trade, as we've just mentioned a little bit before, where you're going to have these manufactured goods and guns and things like that going to Africa, where they're going to then bring these slaves from Africa to the Caribbean, right? And then from the Caribbean and other parts of North America, you're going to have these raw materials, things like rum, sugar, and tobacco, right? We know that the Spanish are going to export precious metals out of Mexico and South America. Silver and gold are going to be exported. You're going to have guns that are going to be introduced into Africa as a result of the slave trade. That's going to also begin to kind of change the dynamics on the continent quite a bit, right? You have the Middle Passage, which is this center leg, right? The leg across the Atlantic Ocean is known as the Middle Passage. Okay, we're getting a little bit closer to the end of this guide here. We're just about finished with page 6. We have 2 more. I believe there's only 8. So bear with me. We're almost done. The empires we talked about, right? For one, we started with the Ottoman Empire, right? And the Ottoman Empire is located in Asia Minor. What causes the emergence of the Ottoman Empire is when the Ottoman Turks, they sack Constantinople, the Byzantine capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. And they emerge on the political scene right after. And this is going to take place in 1453. And it's going to spark all of that exploration that we talked about, essentially. So, what regions did the Ottoman Empire extend into, right? So we know for a fact we saw Southeast Europe, into the Balkans, right? Southwestern Asia, into what we know as the Middle East, really, today. So, the capital is going to be the Ottomans' capital was located at Constantinople, but they're going to rename it to Istanbul. There's a very famous song by at Istanbul, not Constantinople. You can look it up if you want to. Anyway, so the Muslim religion, or Islamic religion, right, is a unifying force of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottomans are going to be fairly accepting of other religions, actually, because they're going to be moving into Eastern Europe, where people are Christian, as a means of kind of not causing serious problems. They're not going to change the dynamics too much. Largely, they're going to kind of, as long as they're kind of willing to pay their taxes and things like that, the Ottomans were fairly accepting. Their major trade goods are going to be things like coffee and ceramics that you should be familiar with. Okay. We also talked about the Mughal Empire. The Mughals were located in India. They are going to be kind of the remnants of Mongols that had kind of drifted down that way, that had been converted to Islam. And the Mughals are going to kind of bring Islam down into India, right? So the Mughals, they conquered much of India, and the subcontinent is going to remain, part of the subcontinent, is going to remain independent. And this is going to be the southernmost part, right? We talked about the Taj Mahal being one of these big architectural sites built by the Mughals. Okay, stop. There should be a gap there or something, right? So anyway, we have 3 countries that competed for trade. We on our key here, we have Portugal, England, and the Netherlands. You can add things like Spain and France into the mix for sure, and you would not be wrong, right? These particular countries, though, Portugal, England, and Netherlands, competed in particular in the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia, where you're going to have the dominance of these trading companies that we talked about. I think I showed you guys a comparison of the wealth of these trading companies and during some of these big bubbles as being so incredibly more valuable than even modern corporations today. The Dutch East India Trading Company had thousands upon thousands of employees around the world, which is pretty impressive for the 1500s. So, what products did Southern India trade in particular, right? Textiles, cotton, wool, silk. We talked about precious gems in some capacity as well, being in the mix, right? And often these textiles were being brought to England, where they're going to be manufactured into clothing and other things, right? So on to China here. China, right, attempted to control foreign trade. They didn't like the influence of these Europeans. They're going to attempt to stop it because China, at the end of the day, was pretty powerful entity at the time. So the Europeans wanted all these things like porcelain and tea, but the Chinese didn't really want anything from England. So a lot of money and things were flowing into China, but not coming back into England, right? And it's going to lead to some problems from colonization a bit later. So China attempted to control trade with these Europeans and limit their influence through things that are called foreign enclaves, these cities that essentially people would act as middlemen and then bring these goods to the continent. So only certain people would deal with the Europeans at all. And these Europeans wouldn't deal with most people on the mainland continent, right? And this is going to kind of exist in Japan as well. Remember, we talked about the civil war that kind of was going on in Japan when these European traders and European people kind of showed up there, where you're going to now have this kind of shogun, a man named Tokugawa Ieyasu, was going to kind of take control in Japan. He's not the emperor, right? But he's this military leader called the shogun. And the leadership in Japan is going to become fearful of the influence of the Europeans as well, and they're going to begin to kind of isolate themselves almost completely. There will be a couple spots where you'll have these kind of enclaves, and you'll have some conversions to Christianity and things, and Portuguese missions, among other things, but largely Japan is going to be isolationist, attempting to kind of not have the outside world influence what's happening in their particular area of the world, right? And this is going to, we know, is going to be a bit of a problem for them in later stages, in particular in the 1800s, when we talk about colonization. Again, we will get, and imperialism, we'll get to there. So, as far as other goods, right? Africa, we talked about ivory and gold, imported corn and peanuts from the New World are going to really change the dynamics of agriculture in Africa as well, right? So, lastly, we're talking about mercantilism. Mercantilism is this economic system, right, where European colonial powers are looking to become self-sufficient and trying not to trade with each other as much in attempts to get the upper hand over each other. So they are going to establish these colonies who the whole point and the sole benefit of is to benefit the mother country, right? To have these resources, these things funneling into, and the wealth funneling into the mother country, often at the expense and the detriment of the colonies, right? It's a bit of a parasitic relationship. It's exploitative, for sure. So this is trying to meet the economic needs of the mother country, right? And during this time, you're going to have this establishment of increased trade and things and commercial activity, and you're going to get what's known as the commercial revolution, where you're going to have kind of new money systems and new banking systems have to be established in order to be able to kind of have these things flowing around the world, right? Okay, so that's our review guide here in a nutshell. I kind of went through the whole thing. I know I did it fairly quickly, so if you have any questions, I'm going to kind of answer them right now. Just post them in the chat. I'll leave this open for another minute or two as you guys do that, but if not, feel free to kind of leave out now at this point and go on with your studying. I'm going to post this key. I'm going to post this key onto Classroom as well in this spot, so you'll be able to kind of go through that a little more easily than having to watch this whole video. Okay, so there's, I mean, Yana, you have the mother country and the father country. It's just kind of depending on which colony is kind of what they would talk about. So call it like a parent country, I guess. Okay. So any questions, pop them in now, and otherwise I'm going to turn off the stream and get going. Well, first off, you're going to need to get a lot of followers to go and, I guess, lead a revolution and take over somewhere, which, good luck with that. All right, any other serious questions before we call it quits for the evening? Sorry I couldn't make the closed captions work. I'm going to try to work on a system to be able to figure that out for situations like this where I'm not using Google Slides. All right, good night, guys. Good luck with your studying. Obviously, you're taking the test tomorrow. If you want to come in before you take it, during lunch or something, I can probably answer some questions for you. If you're taking it on the odd day, which is Thursday, then you have some of you might have returns and things before you actually take the test, so that could be helpful as well. Other than that, good night, guys. Good luck studying.